Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Before we begin, I just want to make a quick note. At the end of this episode, I spend the last 4 minutes walking through the way people work with me and where to find resources, my links, and my courses. If you are a returning listener or are already a client, you can absolutely skip that part. If you're new or trying to figure out what kind of support you need, it's there for you. It's the last 4 minutes. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Paul Colaianni joins me to unpack one of the most confusing questions survivors ask. If I want them to change, how is that different from them wanting me to change? Paul is the host of The Overwhelmed Brain and Love and Abuse and has joined me before. He has spent a decade helping people make sense of emotional abuse, manipulation, control, and in this conversation, we break down a question that comes up constantly in abusive dynamics, the difference between wanting to stop harm versus wanting control. If you feel like you're asking too much, questioning yourself for wanting basic safety, or feeling stuck in the double bind of we both need to change, this conversation can certainly help understand that very complicated dynamic. If you are looking for coaching or how to work with me, as a reminder, at the last 5 minutes of this podcast, we'll go over what that looks like, and I invite you to go there or skip it if it's not right for you today. Paul's links will be in the show notes, and I highly recommend also checking out his content. Hi, Paul. Thank you again for joining me.
Hey, Jessica. Good to be here. Thank you so much.
Can you give the quick rundown of who you are? Actually, I will tell you a lot of my clients have listened to a lot of our episodes and say that they're their favorite. So I do think a lot of people probably know who you are, but just for the new people, who you are and what you do.
Sure. And I think it's great when two people talk about the subject because you get two different angles. So I can understand that for sure. My name is Paul Colaianni. I have hosted The Overwhelmed Brain since 2013. It's a podcast, and Love and Abuse, which is about emotional abuse and control and manipulation. All the stuff that your audience is probably very well aware of since 2019. And that has been what I've been doing for full time, all the time. I work with emotionally abusive relationships and talk about them all the time. And just real quick, it's been interesting because when I started The Overwhelmed Brain, which is about dealing with life challenges, I kept getting questions about relationships over and over and over again. And then somebody finally wrote to me and said, all you talk about is relationships. So I decided to branch that off into love and abuse. And now I still get 99% of the questions I get are about relationships. So that's has been my focus ever since many, many years now.
Yeah. I think when I started coaching, I didn't start with this population. I started with young women going through transitions. I guess over 10 years ago, probably close to 15 years ago. And almost everything led back to a relationship. I always said, like, people come in with a doorway problem of, I think it's my job. I think it's where I live. I think it's this. I think it's that. Sometimes, of course, it's them, and like how they're viewing the world. But then there's, a lot of times it's, oh, well, I never mentioned this relationship or this other thing that's over here. And like, then it was like over. And then once we got to COVID, it was like, here's the thing, because we couldn't escape it anymore.
Yes. That highlights every relationship issue that you ever have when you're just stuck together for a whole year or more.
Yes, exactly. The reason I wanted to talk today is because I
had a few clients basically say the same thing in different ways, but it has to do with the explanation of like expecting change or if people change. And one, I'll paraphrase it, said, Paul says, Paul says, we can't expect them to change, but I am expecting them to change, but they're also expecting me to change. And I said, I think what Paul is saying is expecting that like they need to want to change for themselves. But we're asking them to be healthier, to not be abusive, and the changes that they want us to make, which you've talked about a lot in previous episodes of how you, with your ex-wife, you have noted there were like these things that if she did this differently, then this thing wouldn't happen. And how that was like a flawed sense of thinking that the weight can't be on, if she does this, then it will be fine.
Right.
And so what's happening, or like what I think the question, and I think it's a great question that's coming up, is like, I expect them to change, but they can't expect me to change. And I know there's a lot of difference in that, even though it's the same words.
Oh, for sure. I mean, of course, any person suffering from abusive behavior wants the other person to change, to stop hurting them. And then the abuser wants to mold that person to change who they want them to be. And I've actually had to deal with this myself. Like as far as the question, I get that question quite a bit. Like, well, I want them to change too. Look at my notes here because I wrote something that was actually pretty spot on about that. Let me just do it subconsciously here because what ends up happening is that the victim, and I don't like to use that word, but we'll just use it for brevity here, but the victim of emotionally abusive behavior, any type of abusive behavior, just wants to be left alone. Just wants that other person to stop trying to manipulate or lie or control or abuse in all these other ways. Whereas the abuser wants to control and change that person. And the victim doesn't want to be controlled. So
right.
It's like, yes, you want them to change, but you don't want to be controlled anymore. So you just want to be left alone. Where the abuser is always focused on what they can do to change that person. And the victim is always focused on, I just wish they would leave me alone. So there's a kind of that dichotomy that exists that separates the abuser from the victim, and the fact that they want each other to change, but for different reasons. Like the abuser wants the victim to change for the reason so that they can stay in control of them. And the victim wants the abuser to change so that they will stop being hurt by them. And so I get the question all the time, like, well, am I being abusive as well for wanting them to change? And you know the answer to that.
Yeah.
The victim of abusive behavior always wants the abuser. I'm having a mind blank here, but always wants the abuser to just leave them alone. I just want to be left alone. I just want to be able to be myself. And the abuser wants the victim to be who they want them to be. And so there are many differences. That's how I see change is different for both people. When you think about, let me ask you this question. When you think about how you wanted the person in your life to change, were you thinking about how you could make them do it? Or were you thinking about if they would just want to do it?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. That's a really good way of framing it. Was I thinking about how I wanted them to change, or did I just want them to want to change, or to like, see their own behavior and change?
Right.
I never thought about the method in which that they would change other than outside help. The only thing I was committed to was that the brain that got you into this is not the brain that's going to get them out of it. Like I wasn't going to fight with them on thinking, because if they didn't have another perspective, and I didn't care if it was a coach, a podcast, a YouTube video, a therapist, I remember not caring about the method, but saying like, this has to come from somewhere else, because for me to learn this is abuse and this is unhealthy behavior, I had to have a frame of reference. And so I think I applied the same thinking to the abuser of, I don't care the method. What I care about is that you begin to look at your behavior. But I didn't have weight. I had a lot of weight on that I wanted them to change because I was emotionally invested in it. But I didn't have weight on that. And if they refuse to get outside help, that's one of the things that caused me to lose like hope that anything would change at all, because it's relying on the same brain to change the patterns that got them here in the first place.
Their brain, not your brain.
Right. Their brain. Yeah.
While you were talking, and thanks for sharing that, I wanted to look up the specific thing that I wrote down about that.
Mm-hmm.
One comes from like the change, like I want you to change. I want you to stop hurting me. That comes from self-protection and wanting to love the person hurting them. Like when somebody's hurting you and you still want to stay in the relationship, it's because you want to care about them. You want to love them, but they're preventing you from doing that because they're hurting you. And so the victim's perspective is, I need to protect myself. And so please stop doing that because I want to love you. I mean, in many cases, not all cases, but, and then the abuser's perspective is that it comes from selfishness and control. So the victim is not thinking selfishly and controlling.
Right.
They're thinking, how do I get through this day? How do I stop this from happening? I got to walk on eggshells. I don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing to cause them to be triggered and do something terrible or whatever. And so another aspect of this is that the victim will change themselves to accommodate, where the abuser will not do that. And that is probably the main primary major difference when it comes to both people wanting the other to change. If the abuser says, I need you to do this to the victim, and the victim, some of them, will say, okay, I'll do that so you won't get angry and so things will be nice and we can love each other again. But if you say that to the abuser will say, I'm not changing. There's nothing wrong with me. Everything's fine on my side of the tracks here. So everything is your problem. And so the main primary difference in that is that the abuser wants the other person to change, and the victim will probably try to accommodate in many ways. And they can never accommodate. It's never good enough because the abuser always finds another way to control and create that scenario where they don't have to change themselves. And so I'm glad I found that little note, because that was the primary thing I see all the time. When you are questioning yourself of, am I the abuser? Am I doing abusive behaviors because I want them to change as well? Well, do you fall into the category of you want to control them? Maybe a little bit there. Like, it would be great if I could control them.
Like I would be happier if I could control them because then they wouldn't be treating me this way. But
exactly.
Yeah.
If I could control some elements of that, but I don't want to do it in a hurtful way. I want to do it in a way that is a greater benefit to love. It's more conducive to love and connection. But yes, the victims will often say, all right, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll accommodate, I'll submit, I'll try to change in ways that make things better. The abuser does not do that. And so if you ever question, anyone listening, if you ever question, am I abusing them? Well, are you willing to accommodate what they want in many ways, even compromise who you are in many ways, just to make things better? Because the abuser does not do that. And if you are the abuser listening to this, which is rare, but it happens, then if you are not willing to change yourself and work on yourself and even make compromises just to find some balance, then you are probably going to stay kind of in that realm of being controlling and manipulative and abusive, because you're not willing to look at yourself, and it's more about selfish needs and wants getting met.
Yeah, and it's almost like if you are able to ask yourself the question, what are you willing to change within yourself or to reflect on your own behaviors? A lot of times they're basically looking at, how do I get the pain to stop in some way, right? It's like, how do I get them to not be abusive? How do I get this to stop? Like, how do I figure out where to go from here. Whereas the abuser really, like you said before at the beginning, it's that this is really based on a desire to control and to really not change and not self-reflect.
Well, yeah, the desire to control comes from the belief that they're right. So if I'm controlling you because I want this is the abuser talking. I'm controlling you because I want the relationship better because I know I'm right. And if you do what I tell you to do, if you conform to the standards that I put out there, then we'll both be happy. That's the faulty, toxic thinking that the abuser will have in their own belief system and express to the person they're hurting. So if you are doing these things, then we'll both be happy. But then the person they're hurting, they're not accepting them as they are and trying to change who they are. Where the victim of abuse they're not really trying to change the person. They actually liked the person. They love the person, if it's a romantic relationship from day one. In fact, go back to who you were the first 2 months of our relationship. That's the person I loved.
Mm-hmm.
You were so kind to me, and we were supportive, and you helped me follow my dreams. And 2 or 3 or 4 months later, suddenly you're this different person. And so they also witnessed that. It's another way you can tell. Like often I'll see victims of emotional abuse say that the first 2 to 4 months were fantastic, even up to 6 months, or even up to the marriage were fantastic. Everything was great, and they were so supportive. And then that shift happens. And then after that shift, things went downhill. And excuse me. And I never hear the abuser say, well, in 2 to 4 months, they changed.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that. It was in 2 to 4 months, they weren't doing what I wanted them to do. So I had to try to make those changes because I didn't want to change myself. And that's another thing, is that abusive people will do what they do because they don't want to have to deal with any insecurities or vulnerabilities in themselves. And so if I have, let's just say I'm the abuser, if I have a problem, I have an insecurity inside of me. I'm afraid to be abandoned. I'm a fear of of attachment issues. I have all these fears inside of me. If that is something I'm not going to deal with, if I don't deal with that stuff inside of me and I don't want to deal with it, and I have an emotional challenge that comes up with the person I'm with, I'm likely going to control or manipulate that person so that I don't have to deal with it. And a good example is like jealousy. Like if I experience jealousy because my partner is talking to her ex, or somebody that I don't like, somebody that might be attractive or have more money than me, or something that draws on or pulls on my insecurities, then I will do abusive behavior so that I don't have to address that I am insecure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to work on my insecurity. I don't have to work on this jealousy inside of me or this possessiveness inside of me. And I don't want to. And I'm not even going to admit that it's a problem, even though in every relationship I've ever had, I've been jealous and insecure. Again, the abuser talking. And because of that, because I don't want to deal with it, I'm going to push everything that I don't want to deal with onto you in ways that control you so that I can avoid healing that in myself. And that I see 100% of the time, 100% of the time. Every abuser that I've talked to, everyone that has even started the healing journey and said, I don't want to be abusive anymore, they have to deal with these fears and insecurities and often desperation that stems from these insecurities, that that's how I see it. Fear and desperation creates emotionally abusive behaviors. And as long as they continue to feel fear and insecurity, and they don't heal those things and reflect on those things and discover why they're feeling that way and try to get past those things, they will often push what they don't want to deal with onto the person they're with.
Yeah, they externalize it. Like they're
Yes,
uncomfortable, and so they're externalizing it.
absolutely.
I've
And
actually
so,
had that experience of in the first 3 months, someone saying, you like, or I guess after the first 3 months, almost pushing change. Like when I look at it now, it's not that I changed. It's actually that the relationship had changed and my responses were different than they were because the relationship was different after a 3-month period. But he kept using all these examples of, but at that time this, but at that time this. And I remember having such a visceral reaction to it to say, like, yeah, but you weren't like the person that you claimed to really like at that point is
Mm,
still who I am. And you're challenging me on things that you liked then, you don't like now because the level of control had increased and that level of insecurity, like you're talking about, has increased. And the emotional abusive behaviors were starting to come out. And I was, but like I've had that experience of them pointing to, but at the beginning you were like this,
yeah.
well, 3, 4 months in, especially if you're starting to recognize emotional abuse, you're like, yeah, but now I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to see that. Well, you're feeling it. And
Right.
it may not even be, I mean, you tell me, it may not be discomfort, but it may be like a little confusion. Like, what's going on here? Why are they acting this way? Why are they suddenly being adamant about this when it never came up before? Why is this suddenly a problem? That's what I notice every time is that a victim of abusive behavior will be okay with things the way they are. And then the abuser is not okay with the way the things the way they are.
Yeah. Right.
And so they start trying to shift things around and work in their favor. And so you get stuck and you've already, like in a romantic relationship, you've already fallen in love. You've already committed. You've already invested your emotional energy into this relationship. And now it's suddenly changing. And, a lot of people look from the outside and they'll say, well, why don't you just leave them? If they're treating you this way, why don't you just leave them? Because of this investment that you just put in and you're emotionally invested and connected. And there's a lot of love
Mm-hmm.
because you've opened your heart, you've opened your vulnerabilities, you've felt very comfortable around this one person. And now they suddenly start to shift and change. And of course, we've talked about this before. The victim of that behavior, of their bad behaviors, starts to believe that it must be themselves. This must be me. I must be doing something wrong because they weren't like this before. And because everything was so great up until this point, I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And I just had an episode on this, and I call them stopping points. I think you need to, in any new relationship, especially
Mm-hmm.
when something like this happens, like when something shifts and now you're confused and you believe, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. That's a stopping point. That's when you stop, take a step back, and reflect. Okay, what just happened? And address. So it's like reflecting and address. Like reflect on what just happened, and then let's address it. Okay, this wasn't like this before. Let's talk about this. But what often happens is it kind of gets overlooked or swept under the rug, or maybe this was just a fluke, and maybe we'll just get past it. And of course, if you're ever felt to blame, because a lot of people will do very well at
Mm-hmm.
convincing you that you're the problem, if you ever feel blamed, then you will think, okay, well, I'll work on myself and try to improve that because maybe I did something wrong, or maybe I'm not thinking things through clearly because they have me convinced I'm not. So I trust them. It must be true. And so you take on the brunt, basically 100% of the responsibility for all the problems in the relationship because now you've been conditioned into thinking that you are the problem. And so if you don't take these stopping points in the relationship and take a step back, you start to believe that you are the problem more and more and more. And it just absorbed that. It's absorbed that obligation and responsibility. And don't give yourself enough credit, I guess, to
Mm-hmm.
say, wait a minute, because
Right.
this is not what has been happening. Let's talk about this. And I know it's difficult with some people to say, let's talk about this because they make it difficult. And I'm sure you understand what that means. They make it difficult because they're going to turn it around every time and say, well, you did this and you did that. And when you said this, that's why it happened. And it just becomes just a confusing mess to just deal with that. So you just like you were saying, externalizing, you internalize it. And
Yeah.
so the abuse it's a good point too. The abuser externalizes it and the victim internalizes it. So they deal with it in themselves.
And it's effective to have the victim internalize it, because then we start to question ourselves. And I talk about this all the time, that we lose our instinct and our internal, our internal knowing gets really wonky, because everything is going into almost like into their conditioned thought, or all the things that they have said. It's really hard to think for ourselves about what do we think, or wait, are they right? Are they wrong? Well, I did do that one thing, because it usually contains one tiny kernel of truth.
Yes.
That they were like, oh, well, I could change that about myself, when that's not an effective. I mean, it's if if all roads lead back to you have to change something within yourself, there's probably something going on there.
Yeah. And you said, I mean, instinct is a great point to make. Like, you start losing your instinct. What ends up happening is that it's unbelievable to think about you losing your instinct. It's like if you walk in the house and smell smoke, you're going to think there must be a fire or some dangerous situation going on. Mm-hmm. So instinct is like all the neurons firing and telling you something's wrong. And instinct is also your body responding, saying, we need to do something about this or address it right away. Imagine if somebody, and a lot of people don't have to imagine this, if somebody can condition that out of you when you walk in the house and you say, I smell smoke, but it's probably not a fire. And it's probably something I did. And it's probably something that I'll just have to deal with it later. Imagine if your instinct changed, and that's what happens, is that we get conditioned, we get programmed by people who want us to think and feel and act in certain ways. And if that's conditioned out of you, this is why an emotionally abusive or any abusive relationship will last indefinitely. Mm-hmm. That's to what you're saying. It's like, if you lose your instinct, if you don't take those stopping points and those moments to think, wait, I'm typically not this dumb. I'm not unintelligent.
I'm not this person. Yeah. I used to hear it like, I'm not this person in other parts of my life.
Right.
My clients will say it, and I'm like, well, that tells you something, right? Like, it tells you something very clear around that. If it's all these other areas you don't feel this way, then that's something to look at as to what is going on in this dynamic that causes me to not really be myself.
Yes. And I understand how that happens. You want to accommodate, you want to take care of the person in your life. You want them to feel good. And often, covert abusers, covert narcissists will play the victim. And so now your empathy and your compassion also kick in. So that's kind of mixed in with this confusion, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. But, oh no, they're hurt because they were hurt at 6 years old by their stepfather. I mean, all of this stuff plays a part in, creating the trauma bond and all the. You can feel so psychotic after a while. It's like, oh, I don't know what to do. I just have to figure this out. But yeah, taking those moments and just saying, no, this isn't how it works in other parts of my life. And I think one of the most important things to remember is that somebody who loves you will lift you up. Somebody who loves you wants to see you happy.
Right.
They want to see you fulfill your dreams and smile and have, good feelings inside of you and a lot of self-worth. They want to see that explode out of you because they love seeing you happy. So I always look at relationships, and I don't have to ask myself, it's just natural. It comes to mind. Why isn't that person wanting to see their partner happy? Because it works in reverse too. Because if you want to see somebody happy and you do your best to make sure that their life is as great as you can possibly try and make it be, the other person's going to do the same for you.
Right.
And what I end up seeing, and you end up seeing a lot, is that the abusive people try to keep the other person down. They try to make sure that their spirits are at the bottom, not at the top. They're not lifted. They're pulled down.
Depressed. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So I see that over and over again. And I go, why don't you want this person to be happy? Why don't you want this person in your life to be happy? Because if they're happy, your life improves, the relationship feels better. But over and over again, we see, well, I'm going to put words in their mouth. I just want to control them so that they do what I want them to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what they're saying. That's just what they do. That's where they are. And maybe some are saying that, like the overt abusers are like, I don't care.
Right.
I want to keep them in their place or whatever. But I've seen more covert abusive behavior where it's kind of passive and indirect so that the other person always feels to blame and response. The covert stuff, it's so hard. It's so much harder to identify.
It's so hard. Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard to see it as this is like what's actually going on here because it can get so confusing.
It's so easy to say, they yelled at me and they hurt me when it's overt. They like, oh, that's the worst, a man and a woman, that's the worst dress I've ever seen you wear. I actually heard this one time. I was at going to a dance. It was ballroom dancing when I was doing it in the 90s. And the couple ahead of us, the older couple, the older guy said to his wife, "It looks like you puked on yourself." And I thought, whoa, they're about to walk into a dance. And he looked at the dress and he said, "It looks like you puked on yourself." That is like the worst thing you could possibly say to someone who just wants to present themselves as in a relationship, happy and dancing. And that's how you make her feel right when you walk in. So even back then, I was noticing this stuff and thinking, oh, that's just the worst thing to possibly say. And so I see, I'm sure we all see these things. If you are putting someone down that you should want to feel happy, you're going to feel down yourself. And this is how the cycle continues to perpetuate, is that the abuser thinks by keeping them down, by having power over them, by controlling them, by manipulating them, and forcing them to do what they want them to do, they think that's how you create a harmonious, long-lasting relationship, when the complete opposite is true, as you know. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because they're creating their own misery. The abuser creates their own miserable relationship by being who they are, because they think by doing what they're doing, they're making it better. And what ends up happening is that the other person finally says, "I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. I'm leaving." And then the abuser's like, "What?
Yeah. No, and then they'll say, "But now I'll change."
Exactly.
Yeah.
At that point. And I laugh because it's so ridiculous.
I know.
I know it's hard to talk about some of this stuff, but for a lot of people to hear. But that is absolutely true. At the point where they realize, oh, so you want to leave because I'm doing these behaviors. Oh, now you're leaving. Oh, okay. Oh, I will change.
Right.
And then they finally get it. And I get it. They don't think they're wrong until that point, when loss is a reality, when the consequences of their behaviors are real. And people listening might think, well, why didn't they think that before? Why didn't they know that they're hurting me? Can't they see I'm crying? Can't they see that I'm depressed? Can't they see this? Can't they see that? And I've said this before, I know it on this show, I'm sure, that when the abuser doesn't take responsibility and think that they're the problem, and then they finally realize they're the problem and they haven't stopped, it's because the other person in their life hasn't left. That is over and over again, I see that, is that I can't be that much of a problem. The abuser will say this, I can't be that much of a problem, otherwise they wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Talking about their partner. And which is ridiculous, because that's how you have to get the message across. But yeah, sometimes that's what it takes.
Right. And, I know from listening to your podcasts, I know I've also mentioned when I was getting out of a relationship years ago, I would like listening to them all the time. And something that stuck out to me was, if the changes aren't leading to actions, like if there's not actions being taken, then it's not true change. It's just words. It's their words saying I'm going to change, but what actions what are they doing to do that? And what I've also noticed is that a lot of times they'll change and do the actions until the person comes back and then it all falls off. But in that time, if we sort of take all the lessons from today, we trust that instinct of, no, something's off, something's wrong. This doesn't seem like change. This feels exactly like how it was before. It actually might be empowering to be able to see it that way if somebody finds themselves stuck in that position of they're saying that they're making changes, but are they?
Right.
If it's not aligned.
That's the key, is that and hope, you wouldn't think that anybody would need to hear it, but if somebody says, okay, I'll go to therapy. Okay, I'll change. I'll stop being hurtful. I'll stop being critical and judgmental. I'll stop doing all those things. All talk, but without the actual behavior changing, it stays talk. And if you don't see the behavior change immediately, then it's not happening.
Right.
It's just not happening. If they say, I'll go tomorrow, then it's not happening. Until you see it happen, it happens. So words are meaningless from the abuser. Action is the only thing that speaks.
Yeah. I hate to have to stop already, which I know we talked about. But I really appreciate you talking through this with me. I think that for people that are struggling with it, it's really going to clear up a lot of those thoughts around, where is am I expecting the same thing out of them that they're expecting from me? I hope that they can walk away with a no. Can you tell us how people can find you, but also just share the name of that podcast that you mentioned about those stopping points? I'm going to make sure to put it in the show notes, but just in case somebody wants to look it up.
I think the love and abuse episode is called Don't Call Them What They Really Are. It will work against you. And that is kind of like saying, if you call them a narcissist, it's going to work against you if you use like a top level word like that. Like, you're being emotionally abusive, because you're not labeling the behavior. That's where I was talking about that stuff. If you label the behavior like, when you try to guilt me, it makes me feel awful. So that's a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say you're being emotionally abusive, you don't address the behavior and you risk them turning it back on you, saying, well, you're being emotionally abusive. And then you get nowhere. So I think that's an important episode, even if it's not about the stopping points, but I think that's the one about the stopping points. But that could be another subject we could talk about it another day.
Oh yeah, no, I will look. And I also think that, that would actually be a really good thing to talk about, because stopping points and the point that you've made in other episodes with me and also on your own of the threshold have been really big things for clients. Like sometimes there's I call it last straw moments. I'm noticing that sometimes, like if someone's like really going through it and struggling to leave, like sometimes having that in the back of their mind of like, oh, I'm so close to the threshold right now. Like sometimes it can just be helpful to help them align and plan and all the things. Well, I know you said the name of your podcast, but if you could just say just once again, how people can find you. I'm going to put both links in the show notes.
Yep. You can reach out to me at loveandabuse.com or theoverwhelmedbrain.com. Love and abuse is probably more fitting for the people that listen to the show, because that's all about emotional abuse and control and manipulation. And if you want to send me a message, there's a contact form over there as well. Thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. And I know we'll do this again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If this episode resonated and you're realizing that what you're dealing with isn't just stress or miscommunication, there are ways to get support that don't minimize what you're experiencing. I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes telling you about my offerings, because at the core of my business is one-on-one coaching. The podcast is something that I do because I do like being able to help a broader audience. But the truth is that the core of my work is really coaching and providing other offerings so that people can begin to heal. At the center of everything I do is one-on-one coaching. That's where I slow things down, listen closely, and help you make sense of what's happening in your specific situation. It's not a template. It's not just based on theories, but it's really focused on your real life. Some people start with a one-time validation call. That is a single focus session where we look at one specific situation or pattern that you're struggling with. And the goal isn't to fix your life or push you into decisions. It's to help you name what's happening, put it into context of reality, help you notice where you are in it, and offer some feedback and tools to how to navigate it. I also offer an intro call. The intro call used to be called the clarity call, and it's a short call where you can share what's going on for you, and I can explain how I work and whether I'm the right fit for your situation. There's no obligation to continue after that. It's simply a way for us to get on the same page before moving forward. For people who need ongoing support, I offer weekly or biweekly coaching. This is especially helpful if you're navigating emotional abuse, trauma bond, high conflict divorce, or custody and co-parenting with a difficult or controlling person. Ongoing work allows us to track patterns over time, stay anchored when things escalate, and make decisions in a way that protects your nervous system and your long-term stability. All of my coaching options can be found on my websites, emotionalabusecoach.com and highconflictdivorcecoaching.com. Both links are available in the show notes of this episode. In addition to one-on-one coaching, I offer several self-paced courses and programs. They're called Divorcing a Narcissist 101, How to Document for Family Court, the Emotional Abuse Breakthrough Course, Setting Boundaries with a Narcissist, and Unhooked, which is my program and private podcast that walks you through the full cycle of abuse, helps you map it out in your relationship, and shows you how to begin to break free from the trauma bond. I also write on Substack, where I explore topics like trauma bonding, emotional abuse, coercive control, high conflict divorce, and the cluster B dynamics. There's a free option and a paid membership that offers deeper dives, Q&As, and additional resources. Everything that I do and everything that I build is around one core truth and message that you're not crazy, you shouldn't feel crazy, and that even though I can see patterns in what you're experiencing, it doesn't mean that it's normal. It's not healthy. My work is really about helping you understand what's happening and begin to trust yourself again. All of the links that I shared are in my show notes, and I really appreciate you being here.